Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is how TJ Doheny immediately came out and employed an active lead hand game where he constantly stuck his lead hand out simply to check Inoue's lead hand. Since this is a Southpaw versus Orthodox matchup, the lead hands line up with one another, and Doheny used this to control Inoue's lead hand by momentarily occupying it and acting as an obstacle that blocks the punching lane of the jab, so Inoue couldn't close the distance and get his offense started with his jab. As you could see, Doheny doesn't need to put much snap on these like a punch. He simply sticks his lead hand out to touch Inoue's lead hand, and this was an effective way for Doheny to control the distance. Now unfortunately for Doheny, while he controlled the distance between them really well with his lead hand, he didn't actually have anything to actually prevent Inoue from coming forward, and resorted to stepping back every time Inoue would step forward. Now there's nothing inherently wrong with stepping back to re-establish space when you need it, but at some point you really need to have a trap that will dissuade your opponent from coming forward, otherwise you will inevitably end up on the ropes where you can't resort to stepping back anymore, and this is where Doheny constantly found himself. From here, Inoue would smartly get his offense going by waiting for the lead hand from Doheny and following it back with an attack after Doheny retracts his hand. Inoue mostly waited for Doheny to be on the ropes to do this, so that Doheny didn't have any more space to avoid it. It also allowed Inoue to get closer to Doheny so that he wasn't lunging from long distance. Notice how Inoue also steps in with lead foot dominance, getting his lead foot on the outside of Doheny's lead foot to protect him from counterattacks, getting himself out of Doheny's line of attack. And here are several more examples of Inoue following Doheny's lead hand back, attacking on his retraction. The thing is, Doheny did adapt to this once by showing his lead hand to bait the attack from Inoue, then counter him, but he wasn't consistent with this at all. Now the next thing I want to talk about is how early in the fight, Doheny made the fundamental mistake of pivoting out to the weak side on his lead foot without first creating distance. Pivoting in general leaves you as a sitting duck until you reset your feet, so Inoue would simply attack Doheny, following him out with a punch every time he saw this. Here we see Doheny looks to escape the ropes out to the weak side, so he pivots without creating distance first. Inoue sees this and attacks him by hooking him back in with his left hand, and then follows up with a right hand to the body. Here Doheny pivots on his lead foot again and in punching range. He tries to cover himself by jabbing with it, but Inoue counters both easily with a jab. And here Doheny pivots out to the weak side again in punching range, so Inoue follows him out again with an attack. Doheny manages to block this right hand, but it still doesn't look good to the judges. You see, Inoue is a very explosive fighter who could cover a lot of distance very quickly when he steps forward with a punch, so Doheny miscalculated how much space he needed to safely pivot or circle out to the weak side, and he didn't make this mistake much after the first round. This is the last example of it I could find after round 1. This reminds me of the time Chris Algieri tried to do the same thing of pivoting and punching range against Manny Pacquiao and getting punished for it. Inoue showcased another skill when Doheny was on the ropes, and that is cutting off the weak side to bait your opponent to escape to the open side or towards his power side and walk him into his right hand. He does this by standing outside of Doheny's lead foot, essentially having lead foot dominance, but from further away. As you see here, the weak side is cut off. If Doheny were to circle out to his right to the weak side, he would walk directly into Inoue and probably into a left hook. Inoue intentionally leaves much more space open on his power side to entice Doheny to move that direction so he could walk him into his right hand. Exactly what happens. Here as well, you could see Inoue is slightly on the outside of Doheny's lead shoulder. This cuts off the weak side and again leads Doheny to try to move to the open side, and as according to plan, Doheny is baited into walking into another right hand. Again, Inoue has the weak side cut off by being slightly outside of Doheny's lead shoulder. It makes Doheny move to the open side where Inoue can cut him off with a right hand. Here you could see the feet where Inoue is outside of Doheny's lead foot, cutting off the weak side again. He walks Doheny to the open side and into another right hand. And I must sound like a broken record at this point, but one last time Inoue walks Doheny into another right hand. This is a very important skill in the Southpaw vs Orthodox matchup because escaping out the weak side is usually a safer option than escaping out the open side. By cutting off the weak side, you force your opponent into the direction that is riskier for them. We saw what happens if you don't do this when Teofimo Lopez found himself running around the ring chasing Jermaine Ortiz all night because he didn't cut off the weak side escape route. And lastly, it looks like this punch here on the ropes to Doheny's back is what caused the injury to Doheny's backside that ended the fight. As you could see, he complains about it right after the punch. An interesting but legitimate knockout for Inoue. This really reminds me of the time Nonito Donaire stopped Ryan Burnett with a body shot that also injured his backside. And that's going to do it for this one. Sorry this video is so late. My day job schedule was so crazy last week, I really had no time to work on a video, but here it is. And as always, thank you all to my GOAT tier patrons. There's a lot of new patrons this month, so I gotta thank you all. But Jason Mahinan, Grant Gabriel, Albert Chen, Goss Geza, Marshall Bott, Jesus Galindo, Nyan Valdez, MSM Neal, RC, Daniel Contreras, Lionel Johnson, Val Ravenheim, Jacob McMillan, as well as my channel member, Lucas Miller. You guys keep the channel going, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Thank you all for watching.